All right, let's do some math. I'm going to help you calculate exactly how remote therapeutic monitoring can help you generate revenue in your practice, right? Based on your patient volume, your insurance mix, and your specific situation, not generic, pie in the sky projections that really aren't based on real math in your real practice. I'm Dr. Andrew Grecki, private practice owner, owner of Movement-RX, and I want to, by the end of this video, I want to be able to help you know exactly what RTM means for your bottom line. And so before we dive into how to calculate all that, I really want to focus on why is this matter? Why should it matter to you, right? Well, when I first learned about RTM, people threw numbers at me, or claims that were, I think, exaggerated. You can make $10,000 a month, and practices are generating six figures annually, and this could double your revenue, things like that. And I think it's misleading. But it is impactful. So I thought, okay, well, what about my practice? My practice is different and it's unique. And I don't care what some hypothetical practice in California is making. I care what my 13, therapists, multi-location practice in my market, with my patient demographics, what is the realistic, generation of revenue that can be there. So I built a calculator for you, and I want to walk you through that first before I give you access to that calculator. So what you're really going to need to start with, we're going to go old school and just do like a piece of paper or like open up your notes or something where you can just kind of follow along with me as I go through this kind of mental math. And I'm going to ask you some simple questions about your practice, and I want to help you calculate, what your potential RTM revenue is, and we're going to do it together. Okay. So really pretty basic. We're going to use a very basic formula that I've used with many practices, including my own, but we're going to look at monthly patient volume times eligible percentage of people times enrollment rate times revenue per patient, okay? And that's going to give us a gross monthly revenue. And then we're going to subtract the cost of a vendor. So you have to have some software or a vendor, and I know it sounds complicated, but really it's actually pretty simple. And so let me break down it. We're going to break it down piece by piece. Okay. So the first step is how many unique patients does your practice see per week? And it's not visits, right? So it's unique patients. So if Mrs. Johnson, is with you 3 times a week, that's still just one unique patient, right? So keep it simple. We don't want to overthink it. But you just need a rough estimate of like what are your unique patients that you're seeing. So my practice, as an example, we see about 200 patients a week, right? So write down your number, right? And now I want you to multiply that times 4. That's going to give us the monthly patient volume, okay? So an example, again, if I've got 100 patients times 4, that's going to be 400 patients a month, right? And again, my practice, we see about 400 patients per month, unique patients across the 2 locations, right? Okay, so easy, right? Okay, now it's your turn. So what's your monthly patient volume? I want you to write that down, and we're going to need that number, okay? Now, next step is we're going to look at what's the percentage of your patients that have insurance that actually covers RTM, right? So not all insurances cover it. And so here's typically who does cover it, right? So, insurance that reliably is covering RTM right now nationwide is number 1 is Medicare, right? Number 2 are Medicare Advantage plans, most of them. United Healthcare nationwide, again, most plans, and then Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna. So those are the top 5. And the ones that I know off the top of my head that typically don't cover it would be Medicaid, workers' comp, auto, those types, and some smaller regional plans. But again, you want to find out about your local kind of plans. And so, how are you going to estimate your eligible patients? You're going to do that by, if your practice is heavy in Medicare, you're probably going to have a 70 to 80% eligible rate. If it's less Medicare, right? We're about 52% Medicare, so that's plus the other insurance payers, we're about an 80% of our patients are eligible. But you got to kind of figure that out, right? Most practices fall in the 60 to 70% range. Okay. For easy math today, let's use 65%. Okay. So let's say we've got 400 patients a month, right? At 65%, that's 260, I believe 260 patients that are eligible in my practice, okay? Now you're going to take your monthly patient volume and you're going to multiply that times the eligible percentage based on insurance coverage, right? And that's going to give you your number, okay? That's important. So you have your realistic number of people that actually are eligible for RTM. Now, The next step I want you to do is I want the percentage, what percentage of eligible patients will actually enroll or that will actually participate in this. Now, this is where it gets real. Like not every patient's going to be able to do this, right? So what are the factors that affect somebody who is going to enroll or who's going to be participating in this home program with monitoring? Well, number one, it's how you present it, right? So if you're asking people if they want to have a home program with accountability, they're probably not gonna. But if it's part of your plan of care and mentally you're good with that and that makes sense to you, then you're gonna get much more buy-in. If your staff isn't really enthusiastic about it, they're not going to want to create home programs and then turn on RTM for these people because they're reluctant, right? And so they're going to get lower enrollment. And so we've got to have staff that, that are on board with this. They're not forgetting about it, and it's going to be, something that's successful. And also another thing is your demographics of patients, right? If you've got engaged, motivated patients, you're going to have higher success with this. And if you don't have less engaged people, again, this can help them be more engaged, but you have to consider that. You also have to look at like your implementation approach, right? Are you doing this as a system, right? Everyone's doing it, or is it just here and there, just a few of your providers are going to try this? Realistically, enrollment rates, I would start with a 50% of your eligible people. That's where I would start because that's very conservative. Our practice is 85% of eligible insurances are patients are participating. My recommendation with you would start with 50%, so you get a realistic, achievable, goal here. And so using that 50% enrollment rate, again, if you look at a practice like mine, 260 eligible patients times 50%, that's going to be 130 people that are going to be enrolled, right? So now you kind of take your turn. I need you to think about that. What's your eligible patient number multiplied times 50%? Write down what that is. Now you really have a realistic idea here. And then the next step is how much does insurance reimburse, per patient per month, right? And this one's pretty easy because there's relatively standard. I mean, the codes are pretty standardized. They have the reimbursement amounts. The average reimbursement that I'm seeing right now with my company is $160 per patient per month. And then this comes from several billing codes, right? You've got your initial setup, which is about $20 a month. You've got your monthly device supply code, which is about $50 a month. And then you have the variable of monitoring time, right? And that's going to be from $15 to about $100 a month, depending on how much time is spent from your provider actually monitoring the patient. Now, again, it could be outsourced to a company like us, but again, let's use $160 for this as a reference point. Okay, so this is pretty conservative and realistic. And so now you're able to calculate, your gross RTM revenue. Again, the formula is enrolled patients times $160 a month or $160 is going to give you gross monthly revenue. And so I think that's important to kind of realize, like, what am I getting annually, right? So there you go. And so now before you get too excited, I think you have to remember this is gross revenue. So you don't get to keep all that, right? You have to kind of take your enrolled patient number, multiply it times the 160, write down your gross monthly revenue, but then you really have to think about, okay, well, what will the vendor take, right? The company that you're working with the software or the software plus the service providers. This varies wildly between vendors, right? And it's where most practice owners get super confused. And again, I'm here to help with that. I have really three common pricing models you're going to find out there. Number one is you're going to see a percentage split, right? So the vendor might keep the highest I've seen from one of the major corporate vendors is 80%. So you keep 20%, they keep 80, and that's pretty common actually. The second model I see most commonly is this is actually our model at MovementRX. We are a 50-50 split. And so again, it's a flat rate, but it's based on, the reimbursement rates. And then there's the kind of the model 3, which we also offer, which is do it yourself, where you get the software only. It's $10 to $15 per patient per month if they're generating RTM codes, but you are doing the monitoring. Your staff has to do all that monitoring if they have time. And that's where a lot of practices struggle. So let's calculate net revenue with these different models. Okay. So if we're using our practice examples, right, or my practice example, let's say it's $130, 130 patients total, $20,000 a month in gross revenue. An 80-20 split means you keep $4,160. If it's 50-50, you keep $10,000. Right, so very different there. And if it's do it yourself and you've got 130 patients times $15 a patient, you're keeping $18,000, right? And that's $230,000 a year. So huge difference in these different options out there. And so you got to really be educated on who you're talking to and what are the different models that are out there. Okay. So now you might be looking at that. A lot of people look at that do it yourself. We're going to do the monitoring ourselves, the $15 a patient a month. Why wouldn't I just keep it myself and keep all the revenue, right? Totally fair question. And, but let's be honest about this, right? Do it yourself monitoring with software, right? Which is what is pretty common. You've got, it works if you have staff time, right? So someone needs to make those monthly monitoring calls to the patient. Outside of patient care time, there needs to be at least 10 minutes of monitoring per patient per month to generate any billable codes, up to 60 minutes a month, right? So if I've got 50 patients a month, that means 50 hours of staff time. Do you have that time, right? That's the first thing. Second thing is you got to train your staff on what to do when they're actually monitoring. It's not traditional care. It's motivational interviewing, and there's documentation requirements, escalating issues when they come up, right? It's a lot of communication from the patient to the providers. And you also have accountability. You have to have someone needs to own this in your company, right? So they make sure this happens consistently, right? What can be measured can be managed, right? And then you also have to make sure you're okay with the risks. If your monitoring doesn't happen, if you're monitoring and you don't do the phone call, you can't get billed. So that would be wasted provider time, right? And do-it-yourself monitoring often fails. I see this a lot because staff is too busy, right? That's the most common reason. I had that same pushback. The monitoring becomes very inconsistent. And remember, the monitoring is the engaging with the patient. So then the quality suffers, right? You get these robotic check-ins and questions aren't getting answered by the patient. And so the program typically dies within 6 months. I've heard this story a million times. In my practice, we tried to do it yourself for 1 month. Our staff didn't have time. They pushed back pretty strongly, and we decided to switch to the full service model where all the monitoring is done by a remote PTA, right? And so now success rates that I've seen with the do it yourself, and again, we work with hundreds of practices, it's about 15 to 20% success after 6 months. So not very high. The full service where it's taking care of you 100%, it's about 85% of practices will succeed past that 6 month period of time. So it really does matter to kind of think through that, right? And again, I get it. The do it yourself mode, you keep 100% of the revenue if it works, right? But high reward, high risk. The full service, again, if you're working with us, it's 50-50. You get to keep 50% of the revenue, much higher success rate, lower reward, but again, much lower risk. And then again, if you're working with a big corporate vendor where they're taking 80%, that's very low reward. Vendor makes most of the money. And I see a lot of people falling for that and then just not seeing it being a good return, right? So my recommendations to you would be, unless you have a dedicated staff time, right? Go with the full service, at least to begin with, where you're hopefully finding a roughly 50-50 split. Right? And that's us. So that's what I would recommend. So now we talked about, your revenue, right? Now let's take your gross monthly revenue and apply the chosen model. Okay. So if you're considering that 50-50 split, your gross revenue, you divide that by 2. If you're working with us, that's the 50%, right? And then you can multiply that times 12, right? If you're considering the 80-20 split, you're taking your gross monthly revenue and you're multiplying times 20. That's your net, right? So pretty low. And again, if you're multiply, you want to take it over a year long, right? So, and again, if you're considering the do-it-yourself model, it's that gross revenue, monthly gross revenue minus the software costs, right? And then that's your net. And then you multiply that times 12. So, but you got to factor in your time of your staff costs. You got to pay your staff for that monitoring time, okay? So again, example in my practice would be if we're generating $19,680 a month, the 50-50 split, I keep $9,840, right? And that's about $118,000 a year. So pretty significant. And the reality check is we actually average about $10,000 to $11,000 a month because we have higher enrollment rates. And so, we're hitting higher marks there than most people. So again, it's your turn. You got to calculate that for you. Yourself. You got to do the net monthly revenue and the annual revenue based on your chosen model. I'm going to have a calculator for you, a link in below this video, but I want you to just be able to think through this. And then really, what does the actual number mean to you? What does it mean for your practice, right? Let me put it in perspective. If your net RTM revenue is, let's just say $3,000 a month or $36,000 a year, which is pretty low, that's a full-time front desk person, right? That raises your entire staff. You can give raises to your entire staff. And in that scenario, that might raise your margin by 3 or 4% for most practices. That's meaningful, very meaningful. Now, if your net revenue is $6,000 a month, so double it, $72,000 a year, that's a full-time therapist that you've just generated in revenue without having another therapist. Significant raises for your staff. You might improve your margins by 5 to 7%, right? That's practice changing. And so if you're now you go to where we are, we're actually double this, but 10,000 a month, 120,000 a year, that's multiple staff members. That's major profit margin improvements. We went from less than 10% to about 18% last year. So it's a difference between a struggling practice and a thriving practice. And that's what saved my practice. And I can't tell you how thankful I am for that. And so really the question you need to ask yourself is what would the additional revenue generation, what is that meaningful difference in your practice? Is there one? And if the answer is yes, I would say you got to keep learning about RTM. Don't give up on this, right? But if the answer is no, then maybe you're already like healthy margins and maybe your practice is small and you don't really care and the numbers don't move the needle. That's fine. I get it. RTM might not be for you, but I think for most of us, we're already doing this. We're already generating home programs. We're already spending a lot of time outside of patient care time to help these people do better. I think for most practices I talk to, those numbers are pretty practice changing as well. And so, I don't know. I wouldn't discount this, and I would continue to try to learn more about it, right? Your actual results are obviously going to depend on several factors. And, if you think about what's your enrollment approach, right? Is it systematic to your whole company or is it sporadic? If it's sporadic, it's going to be lower. If it's a system, it's going to be a lot better. We help people with those systems. If your staff is enthusiastic about it, right? There's buy-in, people who believe that this is actually going to help the patient, which it does. You're going to get higher results. If they're reluctant staff and they're pushing back, you're probably going to get lower results. The patient demographics, I think, matters, right? If you've got engaged, motivated people, you're going to have a higher, success rate. If you've got, a population that's not so engaged. I think what really matters the most is your presentation and your mindset. So, this is going to help people succeed at home, right? We need to tell people that, and we need to talk about the benefits, right? And then how quality you're monitoring and engaging with the patient. That's really important. That's going to make a much higher success rate. A lot of this depends on insurance too. If you have heavy Medicare and the payers in your area that are going to reimburse for RTM, you're going to have more success, right? And I think the way that you implement it matters too, right? So if you have strong onboarding and training, which again, what we pride ourselves in helping practices do that. If you've got weak implementation, weak training, it's going to not go so well. So this is why I emphasize the calculator really gives you a potential to execute, but it's going to help you try to determine your results with all these different variables. So you've got your numbers. Hopefully it's meaningful for you. If it is meaningful for you, what I would recommend is first learn more about RTM. How does it work? How do I find a company to work with that can help me implement successfully? I would encourage you to download my free guide. That's going to help you right now. It's going to help you understand everything you need to know. Billing codes, documentation requirements. I would encourage you to evaluate a lot of vendors, right? There's two big corporate ones out there that I think are really, really setting the bar pretty low. You want to ask about who's doing the monitoring. You got to understand their implementation and support. Are they heavy in sales and low in support? And then next step is you want to calculate your ROI, right? So figure all that out, consider the risks, what model works for you. Determine if it's worth it. And then really you got to make a decision, right? You got to make a decision. You have to do something about this. It's been 3 years. It's been out there and you haven't done this yet. So you got to make that decision, right? Can't tell you enough. It's been so refreshing, for our practice. And, hopefully it's meaningful for you, but if it's not, that's fine, right? RTM is not for everybody, I guess. There's other revenue strategies out there, but most of them require a lot of upfront costs, like buying equipment, training your staff. But at least and you're not wondering what if, right? You've done the math. But I have created this downloadable guide and the revenue calculator for you, and you can access both of those right below this video. And hopefully it helps you kind of figure out the math, right? And in this guide, I tried to write, it's called the Physical Therapist Guide to Remote Therapeutic Monitoring. It's everything I could think of that I've gone through the past 3 years that would help you. It details everything from, how RTM works to all the billing codes and the documentation requirements and how to implement, an implementation checklist, how to evaluate the vendor, right? We've got an evaluation criteria checklist, literally everything you need to make an informed decision. And you can get that by clicking the link right below this video. Download it, run your numbers, see if RTM makes sense for your practice. Numbers don't lie, right? The math is math. And so if you ran your numbers and you calculated there's a potential that revenue would make a meaningful difference in your practice, then I think you should go down this path, right? and pay attention to it, right? Pay attention to it. This is not something that it's minor. It's a big deal. If your margins are shrinking and you're struggling to pay your staff more, which I think a lot of us are, and you're worried about the future, right? This could be part of your solution. I'm not going to sit here and oversell it. I'm not going to tell you it's the only thing you should be doing, but it was a big part of this for us. We went from under 10% margins to 20% almost. And so from barely surviving to thriving, right? The math works for us. The question really is, are you going to do something about it? Are you going to do something about the problems you're having, right? We're all having those problems. I hope you will take some action. I'm Dr. Andrew Grecki. I appreciate you watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it, and download my guide and check out the calculator, and I'll see you next time.